So earlier this year, I got invited by Dan Brule to speak at the Breathing Festival. And it was a really interesting experience because this was the first year that Dan and the team had to do the festival online. But it meant that they got to put together loads of different people from all around the world to talk about breathing. So there were people there talking about meditation, people there talking about anatomy, nervous system, different somatic practices. There were doctors, people talking about gas exchange, just this huge learning curve for everyone involved, really, like a melting pot of ideas. One of my favorite workshops at the event was by a guy called Paul Hughes in something that I'd never heard of before called Vivation. Vivation breathing came about in the late 70s. It was originally developed by a guy called Jim Leonard, who's since passed away, but he's passed the torch of Vivation onto Paul Hughes. Me and Paul got on really well, and I just knew I had to get him on the channel. He's the Director of Vivation International. He's taken this practice to tens of thousands of people in over 50 countries, and just a really nice guy. So I really hope you enjoy this video. If you do, please do give it a like, consider subscribing to the channel. I've got new videos coming out every week with experts in breathing and meditation. If you enjoy listening to Paul speak about Vivation, but you want to try it for yourself, he very kindly agreed to lead me in a 10-minute practice, which I'll leave a link to at the end of this video. So yeah, enjoy. Paul, thank you so much for joining me again.
Yeah, it's a real pleasure to be here.
I mean, I've just mentioned there about how I did your workshop at the Breathing Festival, and you introduced me to this idea that I'd never heard of actually before called Vivation. And I'm pronouncing that in an American way, I guess, saying Vivation, but I've just heard you say it so much now that it sounds wrong as Vivation, which is how we would say it in England. So I'm calling it Vivation now. But
so you would say Vivation as
yeah,
opposed
that's
to
how I would
Vivation.
read it, I feel. But now I'm like, it's in my head, it's Vivation. And I'm kind of justifying it because it's like vibration. So
Right. Okay.
yeah. But yeah, what is Vivation?
Well, it's often sometimes called the skill of happiness, but in essence, it is a type of breath work that puts integration at the forefront, and this integration at the feeling level. The idea that we can, through direct feeling, without having to engage the mind in any way, we can make a direct energetic connection with the feeling in our body and facilitate integration at that. And by integration, what I mean by that is resolution or healing. So it's a complete resolution of whatever negative or distressing emotion or feeling is there. And in Vivation, we don't make a distinction between sensation or feeling, or emotion, I should say. We see them as all part of a feeling continuum. And so any feeling that comes up in Vivation, the idea is that we can get to a place of peace, of joy, of integration in a relatively quick period of time. So it's all about facilitating and maximizing our efficiency of integration of suppressed negative emotions, using the breath as the first and foundational element. And then there's 4 additional elements. The second one is relaxation, complete relaxation, which is also part of the breath. And then feeling awareness. Feeling is crucial. It's the most important in some sense. And then what we call integration into ecstasy, or just finding and being open and receptive to whatever joy is actually there. I always tell people you don't have to do anything to enjoy it because the feeling is already enjoyable. Rather, any negativity you experience isn't the feeling, but our resistance to it. So the idea is to relax and let go, and that inherent positivity will become more obvious. And the last element is willingness, just, pushing through the process and being willing to be willing to feel the feeling honestly and be willing to be open to it being more positive than you might otherwise believe.
So. Yeah, it feels almost like to prepare for this interview, I read Jim Leonard's book Vivation, Skill of Happiness, and it felt like, well, first off, there was so much wisdom in that book. I think even people who aren't necessarily interested in more dynamic breathing, even if you're just interested in like mindfulness and acceptance and things, there's still so much wisdom in that book, and it's so like concisely written. But it really struck me as it's almost like the kind of radical acceptance elements of Buddhism but in a more structured way, with the breath being like this tool where, I don't want to give the game away too much, but you talked about your 3 points to remember in the
Right.
seminar. And am I right? Is the first one breathe through the strongest
The
feeling?
first one is explore the subtle changes, meaning, and that's very much very, very congruent or resonant with most meditation practices, which is that you're just staying present with whatever is going on. And in Vivation's case, it's the feeling, because that's our body, it's our direct connection to the now. And
Mm,
so explore the subtle changes means explore the subtle changes that are already happening in the body, in the feeling self, from moment to moment. And we're just, if you can tune, the idea is to tune it in well enough to notice that it's subtly changing, because it always is. Any experience or perception of something that's stuck is an illusion,
mm,
that's created by our mind. If we can just continue to pay attention to that feeling, we'll notice that it is indeed changing subtly from moment to moment. So explore the subtle changes. That's the first point to remember.
mm,
The second is inhale through the strongest feeling, which the idea there is that since we are already doing the breath, since we are already focused on the feeling, by inhaling through it, the idea is where it's like, think of it as, here's my coffee, and I want to enjoy this coffee. Well, when we inhale the feeling, what we're really saying to ourselves is, I want to feel this. I want to embrace it. I'm open to receiving
mm,
whatever wisdom it has, whatever it is. And of course, sometimes it doesn't feel good. We inhale and it's like, oh, this is really god awful. I mean, I do not like what I'm inhaling right now. That's okay, because on the exhale, you get to let it all go. So every inhale, we inhale through that strongest feeling. And on every exhale, we get to let go of whatever we're holding on to in relation to it. So it's just built right into that circular breath. So
yeah.
that's the third one, a second one. And then the third point to remember is enjoy this moment as much as you can. And I always tell people, not more than you can. You can try. The key is to just enjoy it as much as you can. Because even if you can enjoy it a little bit more than you already have, that's an improvement. It's funny, one of my favorite students of all time, he was British, he was a punk rocker. He had immigrated to the States with Billy Idol. I kid you not. Billy Idol's career took off, his didn't. And about 20 years later, he's calling me up and he's got every imaginable problem, smoking 5 packs of cigarettes, drug addiction, alcoholism. His beautiful California wife left him. I mean, he just was in a really bad shape. And I had only been teaching it for about a year. And he couldn't sit still, right? It was like, this is going to be the end of my career. I mean, because this guy is just going to end me, because I'm going to fail. I have this high standard where I have to make sure that all of my students, succeed in this. And he taught me something, probably one of the most valuable lessons I ever learned, and which is that when he was doing the breathing, he was level zero, like, and compared to you or me, or even a person on the street, his ability to breathe was very, very, very low. He was completely not relaxed. In fact, he told me he had 6 cups of cappuccino before showing up. So he was all wired and everything. He couldn't feel anything, at least because he said his mind was moving a million miles an hour. He couldn't enjoy anything. His life was miserable. But yet, when I started to facilitate this process, he started breathing more than he had ever breathed. He was relaxing more than he had ever relaxed. He was feeling more than he had ever felt. Again, compared to anyone else, maybe very little. And he was enjoying the moment, enjoying whatever's going on as much as he was in the moment. And that facilitated profound integration. I mean, within 5 minutes of his first session, he was crying, and then he was laughing and
Mm,
letting go, and had a profound amount of integration occur, which ties right into the fifth element. Do whatever you do, willingness is enough. What he did have in abundance was willingness, because his life was so bad that he brought his entire self to that session, problems and all. So when we say enjoy this moment as much as you can, we mean that. If you can enjoy this moment as much as you can, that puts you in a state of receptivity to start experiencing the inherent positivity that's already there. So I'll just recap. We have the explore the subtle changes from moment to moment, inhale through the strongest feeling, and enjoy this moment as much as you can. If you only remember, I always tell people, if you only remember those 3 points, Doesn't matter. You could forget everything I say over the next 3 days in a workshop.
Mhm.
Just remember those three things and you're golden.
Yeah. I
So
was having
yeah,
a go at it because I always get a little bit like nervous before these interviews because they're recorded and stuff.
sure,
Um,
sure.
and I had all my notes and I was just looking at the highlights that I'd done on my Kindle of the book. And what happens is I normally over prepare. And every time I'm like, I'm not going to over prepare this time, I'm not going to over prepare. And this time, what I did for like the last sort of hour or hour and a half, I've just been chilling, but just noticing those little feelings coming up and
Okay,
trying to
yeah.
breathe through them, trying to do what would rather try and prepare in that way for this.
Right, right.
And actually, it's really easy to enjoy those feelings. I mean, I'm talking about a specific kind of those sort of like fluttering anxiety feelings.
Sure,
It's
sure.
really
Yes.
enjoyable, I noticed.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's interesting because any kind of anxiety we have around this type of thing, where we're in public, there's nothing that's going to actually harm us exactly.
Yeah.
So it's what we would refer to as irrational fear. There's rational fear, which is, oh my God, there's a rhinoceros coming at me or a truck. You know, irrational fear would be like fear of heights, fear of public speaking, and things like that, which of course all of us have. I had a crippling fear of public speaking when I started this profession and realized, well, I'm not going to get very far with that.
Yeah.
So I was able to use Vivation and just deliberately put myself in these situations where it was anxiety producing. And irrational fear always integrates into excitement. I mean, you see it. If you see somebody up on stage, there's either that stage fright where they're in a state of resistance. I'll put it another way. You have two people. One person's crippled by stage fright, and the other person's like this amazing performer from Led Zeppelin or whoever, right? The difference between those two people is they're both experiencing the same basic pattern of energy, which is that energy of being up in front of a bunch of people.
Mhm.
This person's fighting and resisting it. They're making it wrong, as we say. They're in a state of resistance. This person's just they've accepted it. And so you go from irrational fear to excitement. You see it on roller coasters. You see people on a ride. Probably seen on YouTube where the ride starts out and they're freaking out and they're holding on to their partner, they're holding on to the rails and they're, and then the roller coaster jumps around and then within a minute or two, they get shaken loose and they can't help but accept it. They have to take a breath because they're turning blue. And all of a sudden they take that big breath and then they experience that joy of it. And then their hands go up and they're excited. So it's like, what changed? Well, they just went from a state of resistance to acceptance. Not the feeling itself didn't change. And
Mm.
so, yeah. So anytime I feel anxiety, if I can just stay with it, breathe through it, it will become exciting and energizing. And it's
Yeah.
true for all negative emotions. Sadness becomes gratitude. Rational fear becomes awareness. And it's like, oh, it's a rhinoceros. I should probably get out of the way of that thing. There's no point in having a negative experience. It's like, okay, there it is. And in fact, if you can integrate rational fear, you're more likely to be able to avoid it. And that I look at martial artists like people like, you look at Bruce Lee movies, and it's a movie, but any master martial artist they have spent their entire life doing breathing, doing that flow, trying to find ways to relax and fall and sort of flow with these quote unquote threats. But if you ever watch them, they're
Mm.
just aware. There's no negativity there. They're like, oh right, it's a punch. Oh, it's a weapon. Okay. And you see people like Bruce Lee who's just having too much fun at it. He's doing this thing. And then sadness. Sadness and grief can be an extremely intense emotion. But when we relax into it and just allow it to be what it already is, the tears start to flow and we go through the grieving process. But what's happening is when we go from a place of resistance to acceptance, the experience goes from a place of grief or sadness to gratitude. We
Mm.
experience all the gratitude of that person or whatever we've lost. And lastly, anger. Anger again it's an intense emotion. It's one that's very easily felt in the body. Our body tends to tense up. You can see it. It's the most obvious one in regards to resistance. People are angry and they're in a state of resistance. But if you can relax and breathe through whatever we would label anger, the energy flows, and instead of being angry, you go into a state of action. You engage. And you start getting creative and solutions start to become more presentable. You either go to a place of acceptance of the situation in the moment, or the energy is just released up. But either way, you're not wasting energy because it takes a lot of energy to suppress emotions. And the whole idea of vivation is to let go. We're relaxing So all that energy is no longer wasted on keeping it suppressed, as a result, creating our suffering and negativity. Instead, that energy is available now for us to experience more joy and more flow.
Mm. Yeah, I love that was two of the things I really loved in hearing you talk about this was first off that thing that you mentioned briefly there about um, that in your philosophy you're not differentiating between emotions and feelings and sensations because the emotions are really just a labeling and that's a kind of mental thing that we're adding to that. And then also this idea and you're kind of, it's basically what you're saying now about the dropping the resistance and then that changes the experience. And and people are trying to do that in mindfulness, I think a lot, which I know it's not what we're talking about, but your vivation technique of noticing the most intense sensation, breathing through it, it just sort of circumvents all of the mental stuff that people are doing when they're trying to accept something. We're trying, oh, can I turn towards that with acceptance? It's quite like abstract, and you're making
Yes,
it very
yes.
thematic and immediate and feeling based with your kind of technique there, which I
Yeah,
loved.
that brings up a good point, which is that I always say, because emotions are essentially intense sensations. If you're having an emotion, there's probably an intense physical corresponding sensation, and sensations are subtle emotions. In other words, there's really no difference. And so it's all part of the kinesthetic self, or the feeling awareness. And the key is, and of course, one of the nice things about doing breath work and doing the breath is that we can feel that energetic physical pattern of energy that is associated with whatever feeling is. And it turns out the feelings are, in fact, that's what they are. They're physical patterns of energy in the body. Sure, we can have lots of mental concepts about that, as you said, and labels and things like that. But at the end of the day, the idea is, if you just focus in on the pattern of energy in the body that is the feeling, then you experience it for what it is, in its honest, raw sense, the felt sense. And the other part is, when we try to enjoy it or we try to accept it, that's sort of a funny part, because integration itself is a relaxation of effort. When we try to accept it, it's like, I'm going to integrate this if it kills me. It's like, well, we've already set up ourselves into a bind. We've set ourselves up into conflict by saying, I'm going to make that better.
Mm,
Well, it's that thing is already better. So every time we can relax in the presence of whatever's there and just allow it to be whatever's already there, then integration happens on its own. So once we get out of the way and the pattern of energy can do what it does, and that's the interesting thing about the word emotion. It comes from Latin. It means to be in motion. So, the Greeks and the Latins understood this on some fundamental sense. So once we can relax, the emotion can go in motion. It's no longer stuck, and it integrates automatically. It just starts to flow again like it should be. And we're no longer in a state of resistance or suffering. So
yeah.
integration itself is a relaxation of effort. We don't try to integrate anything. Rather, we just enjoy the feeling as much as we can, enjoy the moment as much as we can, until it does integrate, which happens automatically. So it's always inevitable if you just let go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of breathing techniques out there now. I mean, this comes from 1979. I think Jim Leonard originally created this technique. So it's right there at the beginning of this kind of breathwork movement in America. There's a lot of techniques now using circular breathing from all kinds of different places around the world. Um, what I felt was different about yours was this focus on awareness and the focus on, like, rather than just like breathe, 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 breathe as much as
Right.
you can. There
Right.
does
Right.
seem to be, it's like it feels like a more tempered, more conscious way of doing circular breathing. And I just wonder,
Yes.
what is that fair? Is that a fair assessment? And what's the role in your view of circular breathing? What does circular breathing
Ah,
have?
yeah. 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 Excellent question. So, and this might be a little bit of a, uh, I don't want to say taboo, but basically, for a long time, Jim actually was reticent to call vivation breath work, because he said that the breath we are, first of all, we're already breathing all the time. And most people have lots of, hiccups, or an inhibited type of breath in one sense or another. And the idea is that circular breathing is the most natural default state. If you look at, an animal like a cat, for example, it's circular breathing. And so if we are in a state of no resistance, we're probably going to be circular breathing. Our breathing becomes very rhythmic. When we're sleeping, our breathing becomes very rhythmic and circular, right? So because we're in a state of resistance all the time, we do circular breathing, and I put that in quotes, to kind of break through all that resistance. But ultimately, it's the feelings that are the guide the session. It's the feelings that teach us how it wants to be breathed. So this is why Jim actually never liked to call vibration a technique, and this because there's no wrong way to do it. It's kind of like, I have it all the time. Students in class go, "Am I doing this right?" And I come up and go, "Well, how do you feel? Do you feel okay?" And they go, "Yeah, I feel great." I'll go, "When you're doing it right then." If it doesn't feel good, what do? Try something else. I'll say, try breathing faster and fuller, try breathing faster and shallower, or try breathing slower and fuller. Do what feels right for you. Your body will teach you what it needs. And what happens is you're always playing with the breath. So you could say it's breath play, it's breath work, but it's breath play as well, because you're playing with the breath. Because as you play with it, kind of like improv jazz, you're playing with the breath. There comes a point where it just sort of clicks in that moment. It's like, oh, right. And so what happens is you do this process more and more, the breathing becomes automatic. It's just like driving a stick shift car. When we first start out, it's like this very mechanical, artificial thing, and it takes all of our attention. But eventually, as we drive stick shift long enough, it just becomes automatic. We don't even think about it. And so with vibration, as long as we're maintaining that feeling awareness, our breathing will adjust and modulate in resonance with the feeling. So feeling and breathing they're really one and the same thing. But again, I always tell people there's no way to do it wrong. Breathe in whatever way feels good for you. And it's interesting because I have made a point, and I still do, is in all my years, I've made a point of learning and going out and doing as many other types of breath work as I can, and always going in with beginner's mind. So I lived in Bali for 2 years, and there's breath workers everywhere. There's probably more breath workers in Bali than the rest of the world combined. So it was kind of great. Every morning it's like, what do I want to try today? Oh, look, there's a transformational breath, or bliss breath, or holotropic breathing, or traditional rebirthing, or and or feminine yin breathing. And there's so many. And so, and of course, I enjoyed all of them because it's so fun to be a student. And one of the things that I liked about and so it helped me sort of by experiencing all the other types of breath work that I could get my hands on, it made it clearer what vibration is in distinction. And the one thing that seems to be pretty unique with vibration is that there's no quote unquote technique. That is that you breathe in whatever way feels right in the moment. And so at some point your body takes over. We call it honoring body wisdom, that inherent body wisdom. And we just, as we stay present with it, we just continue to breathe in whatever way feels good. There's no wrong way. And that's the nice thing, is like, once people let go of, I'm not doing this wrong anymore, it's like, oh, great. So no matter what I do, it's okay. And I'm just going to, and then boom, they start breathing in a whole new way. They let go of whatever they think they're doing. But at the beginning, it can seem forced, because it's like, wow, I'm breathing way more than I normally do. Or, and I always tell people, well, it's like anything else. You got to sort of push your boundaries. You got to expand your breathing space. Try that full and fast for a while, like holotropic, go for it, really go for it. Take 10, 15 minutes, do it, do fast and shallow for a minute, do really full and slow for a few minutes, or just randomize it. In other words, just do whatever for a while. Eventually it's like, oh, right, that doesn't feel good when I go that way. I'm going to try this way. And eventually it just sort of clicks, and you get it like, oh, right, I just breathe in whatever way feels good for me in the moment and adjust accordingly.
Yeah, I mean,
So when I tell people, I'll give them suggestions, and I always tell them that's all it is, a suggestion. I could be giving you a suggestion to breathe faster and shallower, and you're like, yeah, I'm not going to do that. No problem. Just do whatever you want. My fast and shallow suggestion is simply there because faster and shallower tends to be more effective at integrating unpleasant emotions. And so I will have them breathe fast and shallow. And what I say is they breathe fast and shallow, and then they'll maybe doing that. And then I'll say, okay, take a deep breath. And all of a sudden it clicks in, right? And it's like, all right. And then it's like, okay, you're golden. And then I don't need to coach them anymore on that. But yeah.
Yeah. I think
Yeah.
in the first seminar that I did with you, and I think it's harder anyway because we're online, and so you've not got other people around you doing it, which you can kind of lose yourself a bit more in that.
Yeah.
But doing it on your own, doing it online, I was definitely that student going, "Am I doing this right? I don't know. This is strange. I'm in my living room watching my laptop doing this." Um, but then after the last few days of reading and researching around it and stuff like that, and having a go at just doing it whenever I was noticing intense feelings or sensations, having a go with it and really focusing on that second point of breathing through the strongest feeling. And what it reminded me of was like ecstatic dance,
Oh
because
yeah, I love ecstatic dance.
yeah, and
Yeah.
it was almost like once there was a moment of like, oh, I think I'm getting this now, where it was um, like the feeling of ecstatic dance, but I was letting my breath like lead me. And it's really hard to explain, but I was almost letting this combination of like sensation and the breath lead me, and that felt strange because I'm so used to in other breath works that I've similar to you like dabbled in, is very much like, oh, this is how we're breathing now, and this is that you can lose yourself a bit in that as well. But with this, it felt more, again, it's back to that awareness thing we were talking about, which is the thing that I love about Vivation, is that focus on like what's actually happening right now. And you needing to respond to that and how you're breathing keeps you aware, keeps your focus, keeps your attention there. So yeah,
Right.
really
Yeah,
interesting.
it's funny you mentioned ecstatic dance because when I in Bali they had an ecstatic dance event every Sunday morning. And it's where all the people came out of out of the woodwork, and it was like the social event of the week. And so I was going every week. So I do the ecstatic dance, and of course I would vibe. So that's the thing, you can do breath work while you're engaged in dance. I mean, it goes so well together.
I mean, how did you kind of discover this for yourself?
Well, let's see. I started doing yoga when I was in high school. I remember watching something on TV, and it was like these yogis, watch the yogi, get buried alive and or put needles through their arms. And I found it all like they're like superpowers, right? Like I got to learn the yoga, it was like learning how to become a superhero or something. And so I ended up taking a yoga class and got really relaxed. And my favorite part, of course, is Shavasana. You're sitting back and they have you do the breathing part. And I was like, oh, this is glorious. So I always loved Shavasana. And then a few years later, I'm in university and, of course, still doing yoga pretty much, not every day, but often. And I had heard about Osho, his work, and chaotic meditation, and there's certain breathing techniques, and that led me into Wilhelm Reich, and Neo Reichian therapy. But I didn't go into therapy, but I was reading books on it, and there was a technique there called energized meditation. It was sort of an amalgamation of Reich and Osho, and the directions were very clear. And so I remember doing it at home and having some really profound experiences. This is, in college. And then in my mid to late 20s, I had met a gal who was doing, um, she called it rebirthing. And I hadn't heard of it up until that point. And I go and do it. And she was guiding us through this circular breathing. And she was playing Louise Hay, so these affirmations. But what was interesting is in hindsight, I look back and I think she had actually read Jim Leonard's book, which at the time was called Rebirthing: The Science of Enjoying Our Life. It was one of the most popular books on rebirthing. That's when it started. I mean, it was like right up there. It sold 200,000 or 300,000 copies. So, but it was Vivation. It was distinctly different than traditional rebirthing, because the difference between traditional rebirthing is there's still a lot of cognitive stuff going on. And Jim said, no, just pay attention to what's actually happening instead of what you think may be happening. And I noticed that her way of doing it was more feeling based. Nevertheless, I had some really great experiences. I remember after the third session, I said, I'm going to go home and do this on my own. And she's like, no, you can't do that. And of course, immediately my response is, oh, then I'm definitely going to do that on my own. That was just I'm very much about sovereignty and autonomy. And of course, I'd do it in my home, and I'd have some clonisms and kriyas and and stuff like that. And my efficiency of integration compared to now was low, but I was still having occasional cool experiences and sometimes really big releases. And then in 1991, I came across the book Vivation, The Science of Enjoying All Your Life, which is the first time I'd heard of it. And I don't know what it was, the science, because I'm a science background. I'm like, the science of enjoying all your life. What's this? I open it up and I start reading about the breath and all that stuff. And so it's like breathing, which I already knew was amazing. Science, it just grabbed me. So I just bought the book barely with even reading it. And I remember reading through the whole book. Didn't have a lot of money in those days. And I remember calling the 800 number just to see, because I'm like, oh, I'd love to like go all the way with this. And it never happened. I just didn't have the money and just didn't have the wherewithal. And years go by, and my wife and I had a set of tragedies all happen really quick in quick succession. The first is our house burned to the ground. Uh, Bad electrical wiring in the house, and it overheated. It was our first year there, and it overamped, and it started a fire when we were gone, and we lost everything. And then about a week after that, my dad calls me up to tell me he's got pancreatic cancer and he only had a couple of months to live. And then my job of 7 years, really good job, said, "Hey, yeah, I know you've got all this bad stuff happening, but we're laying all these people off, So they were doing this big change in the company. So I lost my job, my house, and my dad in like 2 months. And I thought to myself, Vivation, this is it. What? There's not. I mean, what else am I going to do? I don't have a house. My dad's gone. I don't have a job, but I got some money laying around. So I thought, oh, let's do it. So I go online. Google was around at this point. I Googled Vivation, got to the website, workshop in 6 weeks. I'm like, oh, wow, look, it's a 10-day workshop. Boom, called the 800 number. Jim answered the phone. And he starts to like talk to me like I don't know anything. And I'm like, I've been doing this for 20 years already, more or less. I'm like, no, you don't need to sell it to me. I'm there. He goes, oh, okay. So I got my car and drove down to LA and took the 10-day workshop, and the rest is history. Him and I hit it off immediately. And he started calling me Mr. Natural, which is based on some RJ Crumb cartoon.
Yeah,
He
yeah.
just thought that I picked it up really well. Like and of course that plays back to the British guy I said. I had a lot going on. So I had all that enthusiasm and willingness. It's like I really had a lot of negativity and a lot of stress and grief and just a lot. I mean, losing all those things is just intense. And I was resistant going in, but I think by the third or fourth day, I was like, oh, it's like, what do I have to lose? I'll let go, trust the process. And then boom, my efficiency of integration went through the roof. And I just started having integration after integration after integration. And I was sold. And within 6 months, Jim hired me on as an assistant to help him with all of his workshops and book sales and things like that. And then I ended up apprenticing with him for a long time. And then I went out on my own and did that for quite a while. And then him and I had a bit of a falling out, just not a bad one, but just differences in business, the way he does his business. But then he passed away in 2008. And before he did, he called me up and said, look, everybody, I've taught thousands and thousands of people, and I feel better about leaving this with you than anyone. I know that you have it. You can do this. So in 2008, I became the lineage holder, as it were. I inherited the lead role, and that was in 2008. So I've been doing Vivation for 22 years, not quite 22 years, and I've been teaching it full time since 2008.
Yeah.
Yeah, part time for.
And so quite a responsibility then to take on his.
Yeah, it was intense. I mean, I was excited at the same time because I was really excited to just take, because this was like my dream. It's sad that it came with unfortunate circumstances, but right at that point, of course, the financial crisis hit. But it turns out everything was fine. People needed it even more. So 2008, I took over. And by 2009, I was globetrotting because people were calling me from all over the world to teach. And I'd always wanted to travel. I hadn't traveled too much at that point. And so by 2009, I was teaching. In fact, I've taught more people overseas than in the States, actually, in all this time. But yeah, I've never looked back, and it's been amazing. But yeah, there's a weight there. So one of the things is that I'm always trying to, encourage other people that get in this professionally, with the intent that if anything should happen to me, that there's going to be other people, torch holders, And I only have one or two people that really are out there. One guy in Japan, he's just, man, the guy's totally Mr. Natural. The guy was laughing so hard in workshops, the entire workshop would laugh. I'm like, whoever this guy is, he's totally got it, right? And he's like the lead professional teacher in Japan now. So of course, he changed his whole career. He just completely, he's like, this is it, you know?
Yeah.
So, but yeah, my main goal now is mainly teaching teachers. I still work with the general public, but my main focus or priority is training other practitioners to eventually take over, you know, and to carry on the tradition.
And well, I kind of there's a curiosity here about what was Jim like? What was Jim Leonard like?
My background's in physics, so people would say, okay, so you met a lot of smart people, and I'm like, yes. In fact, one of my professors was in fact a Nobel Prize winner, Willis Lamb. He was an experimental physicist. He came up with the Lamb effect and got the Nobel Prize for that. An amazingly gentle genius. But I've probably only met 3 or 4 people in my whole life that I would call true geniuses. And Jim Leonard is one of those people. So that means he was extremely eccentric, extremely dynamic, very irreverent, willing to think outside the box continuously. And you never knew what you were going to get with Jim on any given day. So, I mean, it was both exciting, exhilarating, and sometimes frustrating. And I loved every minute of it. I mean, he became my best friend. We were best friends up until right before he died. And but yeah, he was relatively short, impish, Irish, Lucky Charm sort of guy. Big smile, the most ridiculous sense of humor you could possibly imagine. He would always tell jokes, and jokes are so important to this work. You got people and they're all serious, and Jim would just tell the most ridiculous joke, and they just couldn't help but start laughing, which is exactly what you want. You want them to let go, right?
Yeah.
And so he's constantly telling jokes. And so very funny. And then of course he had no fear, really. I mean, we'd be out in public, there'd be a bunch of us from the workshop, 20, 25 people out for dinner. And he would just be talking with no filter. I mean, it's not like he's not swearing exactly. He'd just be talking about stuff. I'm like, oh my God, I would never like talk about that stuff in public. And he didn't care. He didn't care, you know? So he was cool. The other thing about Jim is that he had, like many of us, a intense series of traumas and bad things happened to him as a kid. And I think that we should all be grateful that he had some of these, I mean, really bad. I won't go into detail, but he had some really, really bad experiences happen to him when he was 5, 6, 7 years old. And by the time he was 8, he was reading books on yoga. In other words, it was those intense negative experiences that sort of catalyzed in him the search for healing. Mm-hmm. And I think because of that, it's what led him to traditional rebirthing originally, and then to eventually staking out his own and really pushing integration as the key. And so Vivation is the product of somebody who had a very troubled childhood. And so who else could have done it, right? I mean, who else but somebody who had all that willingness, determination, persistence to find something that really could help people. And so Jim was a full character, dynamic, and had his own issues again, Yeah. But he had integrated a lot. Like it was always a bit odd being around him because there's so many things that, like there would be situations where you're with him, it would be a little bit awkward. It's like, oh right, this is the little things that I do socially to quote unquote feel comfortable. Well, he doesn't have any of those hangups, and so all of a sudden there'd be these awkward silences, and I'm like, and I try to fill the space with stuff. Eventually you just get used to it. It's like, okay, this is something to vibe into. But he was just extremely integrated, despite all the things that had happened to him.
Yeah. So fascinating. Yeah. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Yeah.
And so if people want to try Vivation for themselves, Paul, where can they go? What can they do?
Yeah, so the first thing to do, if they go to the website, there's a try free thing. They can download just a quick 30-minute, call it a teaser, gives them a little bit of a taste. If they want to do an actual session and learn like what we call the first basic lesson that will give them the foundation, we do every couple of weeks or so, we do an online Zoom class. It's a couple of hours. We do the full 3 points to remember lesson, followed by an hour of guided live session. and we do one of those every couple of weeks. And then for people who like it, we also have subscriptions, so they can, they can just join anytime they want and attend as many classes as they want. But that's the nature of things now. Most of it's on Zoom. I still do work with some clients in person, but yeah, we offer Zoom sessions every couple of weeks for people who want to dive in.
Awesome. And then when the world opens up again, will there be more in-person
I
things?
would hope so. Yeah, I've done a lot of traveling, so I have this really beautiful property here in Wyoming. So I'm trying to slowly transform it into some place that maybe people can come and do that. I'll still travel when needed, but the idea is try to get them to come here as well. I think there's a lot that they love it here. So yeah.
Awesome. Paul, thank you so much for speaking.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.
So I really hope you enjoyed hearing what Paul had to say. Just such an awesome dude. What like a calm presence he has. It's so easy to talk to. If you want to check out some of the Vivation practices that he was talking about there, he's done a free sort of 10-minute sample with me, so you can breathe along. I'm doing it there with you in the background. I'll leave a link to that around here in a minute. I've also left links down below in the description to Paul's website and the book that we were talking about by Jim Leonard. So check those out as well. If you enjoyed this video, please do consider giving it a like, and also maybe subscribe to the channel. We're dropping new videos about breathing, about meditation, about art every week now. So we've also got a really cool series coming up about yoga nidra. So if you're interested in that, definitely subscribe. We've got 3, possibly 4 speakers coming in, so it's going to be really cool. And yeah, while you're here, please do consider dropping by drawbreath.com. Submit your email if you want to come and do courses with me. Also, check out my latest book, Draw Breath, The Art of Breathing. It just won 2 literary awards for well-being and creativity and innovation. It teaches you to meditate by drawing in time with your breath on really simple illustrations. So check that out. Even if you don't learn to meditate from it, super relaxing. All right, thanks so much for stopping by, and I'll hopefully see you again soon.